In today's video, I will talk about the landscape of hearing care providers in Australia so that you can make a well-informed decision of where you want to go. Welcome to Earman Dan. If you're new here, my name is Daniel and a very warm welcome. I'm a hearing care professional and the owner of Ear Studio in Castle Hill in Sydney. But more importantly, I spend my days helping people, not just to hear better, but actually to understand better and leave behind the challenges of hearing loss. And in this channel, I break down how hearing really works, how the hearing care landscape looks in Australia, and what you can do to get the best possible outcome. Now, I invite you to follow along in this journey. All right, now, to give you an overview of the market, I'd like to first make a couple of comments on how hearing care is delivered in Australia. Generally, you would go to a dedicated hearing clinic and you would get all things of your hearing care journey sorted out there. In more regional or rural areas, you may find that there are hearing care clinics that have visiting sites in like hospitals, GP practices, or even community centers. They may have their main clinic in like a regional hub, and then they drive out to local communities every few weeks or every few months. These are non-permanent sites in many cases, without their own infrastructure, but may have been there for many, many years and offer some level of stability. For the purpose of that video, I'm focusing on main clinics with main sites, not these visiting hubs. Now then, let's talk hearing care more specifically. What I mean by hearing care is the combination of services and products provided by hearing care clinics. These may include services such as appointments for tinnitus, for dizziness, for earwax removal, and hearing tests. And then there are the products such as like hearing aids, hearing protection. All of that together, I consider hearing care. In this hearing care, there are certain interested parties, and I want to make note of those. What I am not considering hearing care in this context for this video, even though it technically is basically what doctors provide in medical practices or hospitals. Because in the vast majority of cases, the hearing care market and the medical market are kind of separate with only a few exceptions. So we are not taking into considerations ear, nose and throat specialists and their interventions, for example, when it comes to medical management. We're talking more about the private general hearing care market. One last comment before we get into the video. I've taken a lot of care in preparing for that video in terms of researching the data. That data is roughly exact as of June 2026 as what was available on the public internet. I'm not sharing any insider information here. I'm not sharing any data that you couldn't get yourself. So all the data that I rely on is publicly available data. Let's talk about the involved parties. The financially interested parties, you obviously have the business owners that own the hearing care businesses. And these business owners could be individuals or families or institutions such as joint ventures or private equity firms or even the government. Then you have a financially interested party, the hearing device manufacturer that's also interested in that hearing care market because obviously they sell the products in that market. Certain groups you have that deal with education, licensing or advocacy, many of which are non-for-profit organizations. And then you have those few groups owned by ear, nose and throat doctors, but that doesn't make a huge percentage. So mostly you have the business owners, you've got manufacturers and certain groups. And then you have the government. Now you may think that the government is only an interested party in terms of regulation and licensing. But here in Australia, the government actually has a real commercial interest in hearing care as well. More to that later. When it comes to hearing aids, there are essentially only a few manufacturers worldwide. We normally call them the Big Six, but now it's more like the Big Five after some mergers and kind of acquisitions. There are other manufacturers out of the Asian market, but we are not considering them for the time being. So let's go through a list of these hearing care manufacturers first. Firstly, you've got, in no particular order, the Sonova Group. The Sonova Group is headquartered in Switzerland, And that group owns the hearing aid brands Phonak, Unitron, and Hansaton, and the implant manufacturer for cochlear implants called Advanced Bionics. And then to contrast that, you've got the William Demont Group that's headquartered in Denmark. They own the hearing device brands Oticon and Bernafon, and they also own the implant manufacturer Medel. Now, between these two groups, you have around 55 to 60% of the world's hearing aid market. So, huge percentage between just these two groups. Then you've got what's called WS Audiology, that is also headquartered in Denmark, but also has Singaporean involvement. That WS Audiology owns the brands Sivantos and Widex, and together they account for around 23 to 27% of the world's hearing care market. You've got Starkey. Starkey is only a single brand and represents around 6 to 7% of the global market share when it comes to hearing. And then finally, you've got the GN Hearing Group, which owns the manufacturers Beltone and Resound, and they share around 10 to 12% of market share. This manufacturer, GN Hearing, has just been bought by a hearing retail group from Italy called Amplifon, which is actually one of the biggest players in the global hearing care market. Okay, so now we know about the manufacturers of hearing aids now, but you may think, what does that have to do with the hearing clinics in Australia? And the answer is relatively simple, and it's called vertical integration. A lot of clinics in Australia are owned by manufacturer groups as their own retail chain. Again, we call that vertical integration when the manufacturer of the product also controls their own retail channel or part of the market. Let's break that down a little bit more. In Australia, there are around 3,000 sites between around 300 businesses. Now, the best estimation and research, we can assume that there are around 2,000 permanent locations. So we will focus on those, and we are excluding the visiting sites as earlier mentioned. Let's have a look at the manufacturer-owned clinics first. The Demand Group, again, that's the group that owns Oticon and Bernafon as the hearing aid manufacturers. They own the hearing care clinic chain called Audica. Audica has around 300 clinic locations across Australia. The Sonova Group, on the other hand, they own the hearing clinic chain Connect Hearing. They also own Neurosensory, Blamey Saunders, and Hearing Professionals Australia. Combined, out of all these groups, they have around 200 clinic locations around Australia. The company WS Audiology, they are the ones that own Widex and Sivantos, these manufacturers. They own the clinic chain called Bloom, and they also have over 200 clinic locations across Australia. So altogether, you could say that these manufacturers together own around 700 locations, or around 35% of the hearing care market. And then you have other institutions who own clinics, such as venture capital, joint venture, private equity, as well as publicly listed firms. The biggest owner of hearing care clinics in Australia is actually Amplifon. That is an Italian publicly listed company. They own the stores called Amplifon, Attune Hearing, and Bay Audio, which they recently acquired. Together, they make up around 500 hearing clinics around Australia. Amplifon has also recently purchased, as I mentioned, the hearing aid manufacturer GN Hearing. And to my knowledge, that's the first time in history that a retail chain bought a manufacturer. Normally, it's the other way around, that a manufacturer purchased their own retail chain. Now, let's get on to another group with around 300 stores. That's the UK-based retail group with a local joint venture partner, or several actually, that's called Specsavers. Probably quite familiar to you. They have, again, 300 stores around Australia. Then you have Costco. That's an American retail giant that has these huge warehouses. And they have some locations in Australia, but that's only 15 locations, so doesn't play really a huge part in the picture. All up, you have around 800 clinics owned by other institutions, making up 41% of the market. So far, we have the 35% of the market owned by some manufacturers, 41% of the market owned by just a few bigger global players. And then on top of that, you have the Australian government which owns the company Hearing Australia, which has another 200 or more clinics across the country. This is actually quite interesting and I think quite unique to the Australian market. At this stage, you have a government-owned entity. So the government owns that company that competes directly with tax-paying private or public businesses. May they be large or small. I'm not aware of any other market where this is the case. The government, so to speak, has around a 10% stake in the entire industry in Australia, and that leaves around 14% for the private independent hearing care market, such as doctors' groups or individual clinics. Most clinics in this segment of these 14% are locally and independently owned businesses, often little family businesses. I tell you that because I think it is really important to know who owns the shop that you're buying from, especially when there may be financial interests of a certain manufacturer in a retail chain, for example. The government actually thinks that too, that's important to notice, and therefore every clinic needs to publicly disclose those affiliations. So if I were to be owned by a manufacturer, I have to publicly disclose that. Now, in practice, and that's where that regulation kind of falls on its head, publicly disclosing in practice means that there's like an A4 poster somewhere in the clinic, and in the fine print on font size 8, you will read who owns that particular clinic. But the big branding over the shop, that won't give it away. It's not like a car manufacturer, as I mentioned in an earlier video, where you know that you're going to BMW or you're going to Mercedes. But it is fair to assume that if you go to Mercedes, the likelihood of them selling a VW is rather low. And so it is the same with hearing aid manufacturers. If you go into Clinic A that is owned by manufacturer A, it is very likely that they don't recommend a product from manufacturer B because that manufacturer owns their own respective retail chain or clinic, which is the direct competitor of this clinic. Now, each business has their own motivations and reasons to do business one way or the other. While that does not necessarily mean that one clinic does a better or worse job than the other, I think the ownership structure and why and how they do business is really important. This is just something that I would personally consider when choosing a hearing care clinic. Every client has things that are important to them specifically. Some clients may value the independence of smaller clinics, while others feel that a bigger clinic suits them more for one reason or the other. What I really care about is that you make a really well-informed decision of what you think is best for you. As I said many times before, while the hearing aid manufacturer and the technology and the clinic, they really matter. What matters absolutely most is how these devices are fitted. And every clinic can decide how they want to do things. Do they want to do it quick, or do they want to do it comprehensive, or do they want to do it somewhere in between? Now, there's a small group of Australian independent businesses I want to tell you about. They have voluntarily committed to following comprehensive best practices. These are the principles that are designed that clients get the best possible hearing outcomes through a very structured device fitting process. Now, if you would like to find one of those in your area, you can go to hearingup.com.au or look in the description of this video. You can find a link to the provider finder. And you're in the northwest of Sydney, I'm happy to see you in my clinic at Ear Studio in Castle Hill. If you're in other parts of Sydney or in other parts in the country, there's very likely a provider near you that also follows these same principles. At this stage, I should probably say who is financially interested in my clinic as well. And that would be me. That would be me and my wife as the sole owners of the clinic. And my dog, Charlie Klaus, is also heavily interested in the success of our clinic. Otherwise, no kibble for Charlie. As usual, if you've got any questions that need clarification, please reach out and I will see you in the next video. Until then, I wish you all the best and bye-bye.